Hi, everyone. I'm David Kelly, Program Director for the eLearning Guild, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another Twist Conversation. Today I'm pleased to be welcoming Trina Rimmer and Kevin Thorn, two of our speakers and workshop presenters at the Learning Solutions Conference this March. Welcome, guys.
Morning. How are you?
Morning.
Doing well. Welcome. Before we get started on our conversation, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourselves to the viewers.
I'll go.
Ladies first.
Why, thank you, Kevin. Well, obviously, I'm Trina, Trina Rimmer. I'm an instructional designer, and I've been doing instructional design for about 15 years, and for the last 10 or so, really specifically towards e-learning, although I do other types of design work as well. I work with Kevin quite frequently on projects, and we're really excited to be bringing our A game to the Learning Solutions Conference in March. So look forward to seeing lots of folks there.
And Kevin?
Yeah, I'm Kevin Thorn, Chief Nugget Head at Nugget Head Studios, a design and development custom e-learning company, as well as illustration, cartoons, and different types of artwork. And as Trina pointed out, we've been working on quite a few projects together. So where Trina brings her instructional design masterpiece together, then she designs it and then throws challenges at me, and then I put it together. So as she pointed out in our workshop coming up in March, our goal is to kind of bring everything that we've learned over the last few years in storyboarding and storyline development and try to just teach more efficient processes.
So now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about was that idea of storyboarding. I know we've had conversations in the past. A lot of people in the e-learning world, they just jump right into their tool and start building something. And you guys are going to be focusing on storyboarding before you even jump into the tool, before you even start that. Why is it that you feel that piece of the puzzle, this storyboarding before you even start using the tool, is so important? And Trina, I'll start with you.
Sure. I'm a huge fan of storyboarding as a process because it is about design fundamentally. It's about taking the time to think through the requirements, to gather the information, to transform the content. And if you're dropping everything into a tool, you are automatically designing for that tool and not for the learner. So I think that imposes limitations from the get-go. Whereas if you are doing something on paper, and that can be, a sketch pad, it can be a Word document, it can be a PowerPoint, which is probably my go-to, or Keynote if you're a Mac person. But having that time to sit and really think about how you're going to structure your content and manipulate it and massage it and work with it, and work with it in a format that's user-friendly for your SMEs as well is really important. And I think that it's vital to establish a good blueprint before you start building the house.
Excellent. Kevin, anything you'd add?
Yeah, exactly. Just design before development. I mean, you can't be any simpler than that. If you look everywhere else in several different industries, whether to what Trina just pointed out in building a house, we don't start hiring framers and contractors before we get an architect to design a set of blueprints. No more than the product design industry. You start on a piece of paper. You grab a pencil and a scratch paper and you start sketching out your ideas. Now there's other tools for that. There's mind mapping and there's other PowerPoint and different things that you can use, but you really, if you jump into a tool, it doesn't matter if it's Storyline or any other authoring environment, if you jump into that tool first, then you're restricting yourself and you're limiting yourself to what the tool can and can't do without really focusing on the experience of what you're trying to design for the learner. So stay away from the tool, put it under lock and key, design your program first, and then go into your development arena.
So if I'm going to be doing this storyboarding process, there's a pretty wide scope about what you could be doing within storyboarding. So what do you guys consider to be those critical elements that an e-learning practitioner needs to be incorporating into their storyboarding process? And Kevin, I'll start with you this time.
And from a developer standpoint, now there's two phases of it. We have the instructional designer that sort of designs a storyboard. And then if you're the designer and you're the developer, you're that one-person shop. Then there's a sort of an argument with yourself. Says, well, why do I have to storyboard? Because it's just me. But then if you work on a team where you have an instructional designer who then passes that storyboard off to another developer, there's some critical elements as a developer. What I like to see, what Trina and I have sort of created a process and workflow. And there are these little instructions that we've come up with that are specific to storyline in terms of storyline terminology like triggers and layers and slides and things like that, where in the instructional design, especially the navigation, I think the critical element that I want to it's just about the experience and navigation in the path. And I'll pass it to Trina here in a second, but if you have a PowerPoint storyboard, think of PowerPoint slides are in this vertical stack on the left side of your screen. And it's very difficult to see how that links together, especially when you're doing sort of scenario-driven or branching sort of setups. So the storyboard document really comes in critical when it's how do I get from point A to point B, and then if there's a choice, how do I get to these second choices and that sort of thing. So navigation, I think, is a critical element to a storyboard document.
And I would, sort of echo a lot of what you've said, Kevin, and also add that, storyboarding is a great way, just as they do with storyboarding for film, to sort of demonstrate a progression. So you can have a complex interaction, and you as the designer could have it very much envisioned in your head how you'd like to see it progress. But if you don't specify that for the developer and you're handing something off to that person to build, they might come back with a completely different interpretation of that storyboard. So if you can have the opportunity to incorporate a visual progression and an explanatory progression of what you'd like to see built in a very detailed fashion, not only is that going to save you time when you're the developer, it's going to save you a lot of hassle if you're in the position where you're handing it off to another person to develop, because really it can just create all sorts of additional delays when it comes to trying to interpret each other's perspectives.
And Trina, you mentioned the idea of storyboarding in film, and I think that's where most people are familiar with the idea of storyboarding, that the whole Pixar picture of things on the wall, of how they're going to map things out. But I know, and Kevin, you touched on this a little bit, I know that there are certain things that you can do when you're doing the storyboarding process, beyond just creating the story, where you can tailor it with the tool that you're using in mind. And you can do that regardless of the tool that you're using, but I know that you both are using Storyline. So can you give me an idea of some of the things that you do in the storyboarding process that have the tool in mind? Because one of the things that I think, Kevin, you mentioned it earlier, is this idea that people don't necessarily have time, they jump right in the tool, I'm only working by myself. But if you have the tool in mind when you're doing the storyboarding process, it can actually make your process more efficient, which is one of the things you guys mentioned earlier before we started recording. So can you give me an idea of what you do to tailor the process with the tool in mind that actually makes the whole process more efficient? Trina, I'll start with you.
Sure. I would start by saying, too, that one of the outcomes of a good storyboarding process or a good design process is potentially changing your mind about what tool you need to do the job. You might be in a situation where you only have access to Storyline or you only have access to Captivate, and those are the tools that you have in your arsenal, and you have to make some adjustments to the plan. But it's always nice to sit down with the storyboard as sort of a blank slate and then think in terms of, okay, well, here's how I could do that with the tool, but ideally I would like to do it this other way. And then maybe if you build up enough idealies, you'll have a good argument to make a different design choice along the way. But to more specifically answer your question, David, I think that storyboarding with the tool in mind is probably how most of us work. That's the reality that we're faced with. And so having those little efficiencies, things like understanding that you can somewhat mimic the structure of the course that you would ultimately lay out in Storyline just by using your slides and your slide naming and numbering in PowerPoint to make that transition that much easier. Things like hyperlinks in PowerPoint can easily be imported into Storyline, so you can basically move from a storyboard to a Storyline prototype really rapidly using that methodology and let your SMEs weigh in on things. Because what's one thing that I've experienced, and I'm sure you guys can agree with me, going from paper to digital is a tough transition. A lot of SMEs don't get storyboards, and they will not have a lot of feedback for you. And then the moment you get it into the tool, into this beautifully articulated alpha release, they suddenly come back to you, well, that's not what we wanted. Well, if you could make that process a little bit quicker, if you could make that a little bit smoother, why not? Why not leverage that?
Excellent. Kevin?
Yeah, exactly. And going back to PowerPoint, it doesn't matter what tool you use. If you use PowerPoint or Word, but for instance, PowerPoint, again, and we're all familiar with the left-hand stack of slides from top to bottom. And you can put the nice graphics in there, and you can have really sort of dressed up visually. You can have all the content in there, and you can send that off as your storyboard for review. And from a PowerPoint presentation sort of history of SMEs looking at that type of a document, wow, that looks great. That's exactly what we wanted. Everything's there. It's been proofread. Let's go to develop. Then when you put it in and they start seeing things interact and you start experiencing that in a digital sort of live environment, all of a sudden you get all of these, well, wait a minute, that's not exactly what we had in mind. So one of the real tips that we like to do, especially, again, there's different between PowerPoint and Word, and it doesn't matter, it's just what you're comfortable with. But Storyline is set up in a scene slide layer, sort of hierarchy, where PowerPoint is slide, 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 slide. So what we do in PowerPoint 10 and 13, I'm not sure about PowerPoint 2007, but there's the ability where you can add a section within, so you can section out slides in PowerPoint. So in the storyboarding process, and what we've developed and what Trina's really gotten really good at to help me is, let's say, for instance, you have an introductory section of slides that you want to present to your learner, then that would be scene 1, which then transfers into Storyline almost seamlessly. And as we're thinking through that initial phase, we got to think down the road in terms of audio narration and that sort of thing. A lot of times we'll get a client that'll take off and they'll go record all the audio, and we'll have audio as it's designed in PowerPoint but doesn't necessarily fit in Storyline because you have layers. So you might have a slide. Well, let's think of a typical multiple choice question with 2 feedback layers. If you want audio in all those 3 places, you actually have 3 audio files, one for the question, one for the correct feedback, one for the incorrect feedback. Do you make 3 slides in PowerPoint to indicate that? So those are some of the questions that we'd start working through and say, how do you make that more efficient, not only for yourself as the designer, but for your developer, whether you're the developer, and also for your SME, so we can help transition the SME into that live version.
I think too, it's also an opportunity, again, to kind of, and I sort of have a love-hate with this term, but to fail fast, but to get that prototype out in front of them that much quicker, because that really does bring that storyboard to life, and it's a lot more meaningful. And that's when the subtle requirements that are hard to gather up front around how things behave and how interactions are experienced by users and testers, that's when that stuff tends to surface. So if you can get out in front of that quicker and faster, then then you're that much better off, right?
So as I'm listening to you guys, I'm hearing the benefits of storyboarding on both sides of the equation. How it's enhancing the design and the overall product that you're doing, but how it's also making the process more efficient. And I know that that's going to be a focus of what you're going to be exploring in the workshop in Learning Solutions. So if I'm going to be at Learning Solutions in Orlando this March, and I'm going to be attending your workshop, can you give me an idea of what I can expect to experience as we take a deeper dive during that day?
A really fun, great day.
And
be more specific.
Kevin breathing occasionally heavily into his microphone.
Yeah, that's why I'm not having that.
No, I think that you can expect to have something that is very hands-on. Kevin and I we're not big believers in you sit back while we lecture to you. We're very about let's create a really interactive experience, something that's very hands-on, and hopefully you're going to leave. Our goal is that you leave with lots and lots of efficiency tips, tools, new ideas, and probably some great examples as well, because we certainly have assembled a lot of storyline stuff over the years and a lot of storyboards over the years. And I think that we're at this point we've got some nice tips to share with folks.
Right. Yeah, we have storyboards in PowerPoint, we have storyboards in Word, and we have templates for you. And then we're gonna sort of maybe build from scratch to kind of show you here's sort of a way to go, and then what happens. Sort of what Trina was talking about, that fail safe. Let's do this storyboard, this method, transfer that into Storyline, and let's see some of the things that we have to basically do over once we get in Storyline. Well, how can we eliminate that process in Storyline and take care of it on the front end over at the storyboard side? But also there's additional storyboards, and a lot of times we'll see a storyboard with navigation elements, content, audio narration, other kind of tips, and then next thing you know, this document gets really, really busy. So then there's other tips on how do you prepare a storyboard for audio narration? How do you prepare a storyboard for sort of your graphics and placement? If you have a very video-heavy or image-heavy course where you've got hundreds of different types of images, and there's a storyboard on how to treat those. You know, do we have thumbnail images of the same thing, and what do those thumbnail, and think of a style guide. We create style guides for our courses, and it's part of this, I call it the storyboard workbook. It's all the documents that go into that sort of design process, and there's a style guide, and that ties into the UI, the colors, the placements, and different things like that. If you think about it, and I just read an article this morning actually talking about the interface audit, or the interface inventory. And this is all of the elements and pieces and parts and all the bits and pieces in your project. Where do they live? What colors are they? What font are you choosing? All of that sort of stuff. And I think in summary, when it comes to the whole storyboarding process on the front end, the back end is what happens if you have to revisit this course 6 to 8 months from now. That document is your architect, that's your blueprint, to help you, oh, that's why I did that. So now you have a documented reference that you can refer to if you have to go back and review or edit or update.
That's excellent, and it sounds like the workshop, in addition to just understanding the value of it, is going to make it actionable, which is always what people really take away of value from a workshop, is how much they can take back and apply in their organization, and it sounds like it's going to be a great experience for that, for those who want to incorporate storyboarding into their tool set and improve upon that.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, if you want to learn more about the workshop or any of the workshops that are going on, please do visit the conference website, learningsolutions15.com. The Learning Solutions Conference and Expo takes place March 25th through the 27th, with workshops taking place on March 23rd and 24th. If you want to learn more, please do visit our website, learningsolutions15.com. Registration for the conference and for the workshops is currently open, so check out that website for more details. Kevin and Trina, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me this morning about storyboarding.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Twist Conversations and at Learning Solutions in this March in Orlando. Take care, everybody.